So the great shepherd to you on Sunday morning is that you and I are entirely dependent. We have to have a guide or we're completely done in for. We're lost. Here's two ways Tim Keller says it. He says this is two ways that we're like sheep. He says we're dependent in our understanding, meaning you and I are constantly overestimating what we think we can do, and we're constantly underestimating what we can accomplish. And so we're always in this move from trying to make the right decision to make a bad decision, and we're not sure we made the right decision, and then we overestimate our ability, and then we make the wrong decision. We underestimate ourselves. We don't make enough of a decision. And here's a way to boil that down. Tim Keller, I like how he says it. He's like the present you looks at the past you and says, what a jerk. I can't believe that past me thought those things. But here's what that means. If present you looks at past you and says, just what totally clueless. That means that future you is going to look at present you and say, what a jerk. Doesn't understand. So, you're 70 now, and you look back on 45-year-old you, and you're like, oh, just didn't understand. You're 45 now, and you look back on 20-year-old you, and you're like, oh, that 20-year just was a complete idiot. You're 20, you look back on when you were 15, and you go, so I didn't understand what it was like. And we think, we look at ourselves, and we go, I was a jerk. But then we just think right now that we're just almost about to get over it, right? We're just almost out of our idiocy, which is kind of the essence of our sheepness. So we're dependent in our understanding. And then Tim Keller says that we're dependent in our self-image, and it goes like this. This is kind of a line we tell ourselves as a culture. We say, the only thing that matters is what you think. You don't need to worry about what anybody else thinks about you. You just do you. The best example I can come up of how kind of ridiculous this is if you watch the show American Idol, and they always put somebody in, and you listen to them sing, and you think, how did that person get all the way to a public stage on national television and make an absolute fool of themselves? And when the judges say to the person, hey, you can't sing, they look like they're wounded, they're hurt. They're like, what? Because they've been told their whole life, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, it only matters what you think. We aren't actually able to create ourselves, our self-image. We're not actually able to put ourselves together. Now, there's some things going underneath the hood for us as a culture that put us in this place and make it worse. Charles Taylor, he's a philosopher, Canadian Christian philosopher, and he says that what we ought to do is compare ourselves to the way we were as a society 500 or so years ago. And what we thought about ourselves is, there's just a lot of forces that could affect us, and we're what he called porous, meaning we were porous. We were open to influences. So outside forces could get to us. And so we also, as a result, we felt wonder about life. We're like, there's so much mystery I don't understand. And we felt wonder. And then we also felt our sense of neediness. And if you'd said to someone 500 years ago, you're dependent, they would have said, well, of course. But us today, Charles Taylor says that we've created what he calls the buffered self. Think about yourself. And we've padded ourselves from reality and from anything that doesn't align with the way we see ourselves. And what we've done is we live in a customized world. We live in where everybody has their boutique experience of life. I'll give you an example. Back in the day, there were only 3 channels on 4 if you counted public broadcasting, but 3 channels, and they went off at midnight. I know everyone in this is like, what? What do you? And so when something would happen nationally, we would all have a collective experience because everybody was viewing the same thing, hearing the same person describe it. Tom Brokaw or Charles Cronkite or somebody would describe the same thing, and we would all go, yeah, okay. And you would talk about it the next day at work. And that's essentially gone because now we have infinite channels, and It's just whatever you like. So there's no cultural phenomena that we all share. Everything's personalized. And so what happens is we're kind of disenchanted from life, and we say, hey, we're buffered. Nothing can get to us. And so maybe more than any generation before, we don't believe that we need any kind of outside help. We believe that we're independent. And so here's what we do. We come to everything assuming that what we really need is we just need a little tweak. There's not that much wrong with this. We just need a tweak. And what we do is we take even Jesus and we make Jesus into the tweak. And Jesus becomes the accessory. Jesus becomes this accessory to how we see our politics, or to how we see our spirituality, or to how we see the world. And we think the way we think about the world is the correct way. And we take Jesus and we make Jesus the poster boy of how we see things. And so we're buffered. We're like, I don't want to be dependent. Now, here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, you and I are the sheep running around. Here's a way to think about what it means to be dependent. And maybe you won't like this, but this is the truth. I am needy, and I cannot create myself. Neediness, did you realize this about you, is a feature of your humanity and not a bug? I'll tell you what, I need people to love me. I need people to encourage me. I need people to tell me that I'm doing okay. I need people to forgive me. I need people to help me. And it took me a long time to recognize that I'm a needy person. I have needs. And that I stand in relation to God as a sheep does to a shepherd. The sheep looks at the shepherd and doesn't fully understand, but somehow knows that is who they need. Because neediness is a feature of our humanity, not a bug. And we don't want to admit that we're dependent because we're afraid that someone will misuse that against us. And what the reality is that God then stands in relation to us as the shepherd does to the sheep. So God knows that we don't understand. He knows that we are dependent and that we are clueless about it most of the time. So we need to confess again that we are dependent. Here's the second thing from this text, the confession that we need, is that Jesus is exclusive. Jesus is exclusive. Jesus says he's the door. This is an image that everybody, when they heard Jesus say this, would understand. I've got a picture here. This is a very crude drawing from me, digital, of a sheep pen. It would be sometimes a square, sometimes circular, and then the door would be open, and what would happen is the shepherd would lay themselves down at night in the door, and they would literally lay their life down for the sheep. Jesus even says it in verse 11. He says, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Jesus' life functions as the door. When we talk about Jesus on the cross, we talk about the resurrection. It's Jesus' very body, his very self is the access point to everything that God has. It's like, I'm the door. But here's what he says. He says, I'm the door. He doesn't say, I'm a door, or I'm one of many doors, or I'm the guide to the door that you want to choose, and I'll help you figure out which door to go through. He says, I'm the door. This is a massively exclusive claim. So there's only one door, Jesus is saying. Only one. Now, here's what it means. That means there's not multiple paths up the same mountain. That means there's not different expressions of the same truth. Someone who's, of another faith, they're just saying the same thing using different words. It's not a piece of some larger truth. Jesus is saying he's the door. He's the way. There isn't another way. Jesus is exclusive. Maybe the most famous way this gets talked about, is the Buddhist story of the men and the elephant. They're all blind, and they're all feeling the elephant, and one tusk and says, "Oh, they don't know what an elephant is. Oh, it's long, it's hard, it's got a point at the end," and another one's holding the leg of the elephant. He's like, no, it's not. It's big, it's round, it's kind of rough. And another one's holding the tail and says, no. It moves back and forth, and it's got soft things at the end, and it's not. And the point of the story is to say, hey, everybody has a perspective. Nobody's right. There are all these different perspectives. How can you claim to have the one truth? Everybody. And here's the irony of it, is that when you say that, you're claiming the perspective, you're using the story to say doesn't exist, right? Someone has to stand outside and look at everybody making the mistake. And so Jesus is saying there is one door. This is exclusive. Now, I get it. What this does in our culture today is it makes everybody squirm. Now, let me make sure you hear what I am not saying. I am not saying by that, hey, there's one true church and everybody outside these doors is deceived, and if you're in the room, you're right. That's not what I'm saying. There's not one true church and it's us. There's one door, and it's Jesus. That's what we're saying here. Now, I want to be really careful here because I'm very aware that you and I have a common human struggle and that we are afraid of being excluded. So I want to make sure I'm not tapping into that fear. Can I relieve the tension for just a second about this exclusive claim from Jesus? Well, give me two ways. Well, how do you win at anything in life? You know, the way you win at anything in life is that you make an exclusive commitment to it. You know, you want to be great at a sport. What you have to do is you have to make an exclusive commitment. I'm going to commit myself to training. I'm going to commit myself to practice. I'm going to commit myself to a feedback. I'm going to commit myself to improvement because I want to be great at this sport. I want to succeed at the highest level. You go to a professional athlete, they have made an exclusive commitment to that sport so that they can be a success, because that's how you win at anything. You want to win as a parent, make an exclusive commitment to being a great parent. You want to be married and love each other, make an exclusive commitment to figuring out what that means. You want to do great in school, make an exclusive commitment to doing well in school. It's the key to winning at anything. And that's just how it works. That's how you win at anything, is you make an exclusive commitment. There's a piece of logic in formal logic. If you've ever studied formal logic, you know it's really confusing. You have to get your mind around it. But there's this thing called the law of non-contradiction. Let me tell it to you and then just explain it for you, because it's a little confusing. Here's the law of non-contradiction. It goes like this. A is not non-A. You're like, what? Here's what it means. Blue is not green. Sky is not the ground. You can't be, in other words, you can't be two things at the same time. Someone can't say, I'm the door, and then be one of many doors at the same time. That doesn't work. It's the law of non-contradiction. You can't have both. It just doesn't work that way. Well, what do you do about other claims? Because an average person in our culture would say, well, wait a second. Are you saying that no one else ever says anything that's true? Are you saying, like, if someone's a Hindu and they grew up in India, that they just don't have any access to the truth? Or someone who's Muslim and grew up in Pakistan, that they have no access? What are you saying? What if someone grew up and they don't know anything about God? Are you saying they have no access to the truth? Here's what I'm saying. Here's what Jesus is saying here. That Jesus is the source of what's true. So anytime you find something that's true, that points to the God of truth. Most theological systems have a way of explaining that the grace of God works outside what we can understand. Some theologians call it common grace. In our tradition, we call it prevenient grace, the grace that goes before, that God's grace is always at work. Jesus said in John 5:17, he said, my Father is always at work, meaning you can't go somewhere that God is not already there. So our team that's going to Ecuador, they're not taking God with them. God is already in Ecuador. They're going to go join God in what God's already doing in Ecuador. You can't go somewhere that God's not already there, because he's always at work everywhere, every place that you go. One of my heroes is E. Stanley Jones, and he was a missionary to India. And what he did is he met Gandhi. He was well regarded. He was on national magazines here in the United States as the greatest missionary in the world at the time. And he started these things called ashrams, Christian ashrams. An ashram was a Hindu philosophical society. And he took that name because he said, hey, it's good to learn. He took something that was true. It's good to learn. And he brought people together and they talked about the way of Jesus and how Jesus is the door. And here's what he was doing. He was affirming what was true because he knew that whatever was true points to Jesus ultimately, who is the door. Here's one way people say it, is that all truth is God's truth. Now, I understand that this maps actually something really deep on the heart, because you hear all this language of exclusion and you're afraid, like I'm afraid that you'll be excluded. And so what we do out of our fear is we create alternatives. And the way we think about that as a culture is we say, we call it inclusivity, right? But really what we mean is it's inclusive exclusivity, because what we do is we say, you know what, I don't like the idea that there's one door, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new door, and that door that you have to go through is the way I see the world, is my ideology, and then if you don't, we're going to tell you that you're welcome. Anybody's welcome, and all people are welcome, and everyone is God's children, and but if you don't actually, we find out that you don't actually share our ideology, you're actually not welcome. You're excluded because of your beliefs. Now, I mean, this is how we operate as a society, and it sounds so inclusive to say, hey, everybody's welcome and all opinions. But here's what the reality is. It always comes down to, you're only welcome if you see it like I do. And if you see it like I do and like we do, then you're included. And if not, you're excluded. Now, you may think I'm calling out our inclusive culture. Absolutely. But here's what I'm also doing. I'm calling out us as a collective church, because our tendency as human beings is out of fear, we exclude. Jesus does the opposite. Jesus does exclusive inclusivity. It works like this. There's only one way, but because your current beliefs aren't the door, Jesus is, then you are welcomed in. Because see, it's not about what you actually think, it's about Jesus who's the door. You come in through Jesus, not your ideology. Now, will your ideology change once you understand Jesus? Absolutely. But you don't come in through the way you see things. You come in through Jesus because he's the door. There's one door, but anyone can enter. Do you see how it works? Inclusive exclusivity is like there's a door, but it's just you think like we do. Jesus is exclusive inclusivity. There's one door, but anybody is welcome. So that means Jesus is exclusive, but the church isn't. I'm the door, Jesus says, but it's for the sheep. There's one door, many sheep. So who's allowed in? Anybody who has the humility to see that they're a sheep and that they're dependent. That's me. Okay, I don't know if that makes good news to you, but I'm like, I got it now. It's taken me this long in my life to understand that I'm dependent and I have needs. I need it. I'm willing to humble myself. Jesus is exclusive.